Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and it's been a while. I've really missed you guys, so welcome back to both of us. Today, I am very excited to announce another spectacular year of Jane Austen July. Jane Austen July is one of my favorite times of year on BookTube. It's a month-long readathon dedicated to celebrating the immense talent of Miss Jane Austen. It's an opportunity to immerse ourselves in her writing, to learn all about her life and her time period, and to examine the scope of her influence and her legacy. So whether you are a massive fan of Jane Austen, or whether you've never read anything by her before and maybe don't really see what all the fuss is about, I promise you, this readathon is for you. Jane wrote her novels over 200 years ago, and yet she captures the complexities and subtleties of human interaction in a way that is all too relatable and relevant to our world today. Each time I revisit her writing, it's like rekindling a relationship with an old friend. But her work is also structured with so many layers and details that each time I read her novels, there's something new for me to explore there as well. There's always some new angle or aspect of her work that I never noticed before. Jane Austen's novels are my ultimate comfort reads, and there's something unequivocally special about us coming together as a community this month to enjoy and to take solace in her work. So I hope you'll join me and my fellow co-hosts, Katie from Books and Things and Claudia from Spinster's Library, as we celebrate all things Jane Austen. The only thing you truly need to do to participate is to read any Jane Austen work of your choosing. But if you're eager for more, there will be group read-alongs as well as our usual challenges, which encompass a wide array of opportunities for exploring everything related to Jane Austen. So for the rest of the video, I'm going to go through all of the challenges and recommend some of my favorites for each challenge. Do be sure to take a look in the description for lots of helpful links. I will put the schedules for the group reads down there, as well as a link to the Jane Austen July Goodreads group. So the first challenge for Jane Austen July is to read one of Jane's main 6 published novels. So those in no particular order are Mansfield Park, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Emma. And this year, our first group read is Sense and Sensibility. We will be reading it from July 1st through July 16th, which means reading about 3 chapters a day. I'll leave a link to the detailed schedule below for you if you want to join us with this one. But Sense and Sensibility follows 2 sisters, Marianne and Eleanor Dashwood, and their relationship with each other, as well as various romantic interests. Marianne is quite sensible, meaning she's very emotional and impulsive and spontaneous, whereas Eleanor is governed by sense. She's very responsible and logical and rational. And the 2 of them have quite different temperaments, so it's interesting to see that dichotomy play out over the course of the novel. The novel begins with the sisters and their widowed mother and younger sister all forced to leave their family home of Norland Park and move to Barton Cottage, where the sisters navigate new acquaintances and try to assure their marriage prospects. I'm really excited for this read-along this year. I haven't read Sense and Sensibility in such a long time. It's actually a contender for my least favorite Jane Austen novel, but I still love it because it's Jane Austen. My least favorite Austen novel is still one of my favorite novels, if that makes sense. So yes. Anyway, I know a while back Katie from Books and Things felt similarly to me, and then she reread it and it leapt up on the rankings for her, so who knows, perhaps this reread might change my opinion of it. I'm also really excited for this reread because my husband will be joining me this year. It will be his second Jane Austen book ever. Last year, he read Pride and Prejudice as his first Austen novel, and I just had so much fun discussing it with him. So I can't wait to do the same thing this year. If you haven't read Austen before, I actually recommend Sense and Sensibility as a good place to start with her work. I feel like it's one of her more accessible works, along with Pride and Prejudice. So I usually recommend it as one of the 2 good starting points for Austen. So yes, I do hope that you'll join us this year in reading Sense and Sensibility. I'm really looking forward to it. The second challenge is to read something by Jane Austen that is not one of her main 6 novels. Jane Austen is definitely most famous for her 6 published novels, but she has written other things as well. Her novella, Lady Susan, is hysterical and features the conniving and manipulative protagonist, Lady Susan Vernon, who tries to secure herself a favorable second marriage by any means necessary, even if it's at the expense of her daughter's prospects of happiness. You could read a bind-up of Austen's letters to gain deeper insight into the author's life and the way her mind works. It's amazing how much of Austen's humor finds itself in her descriptions of daily life. You could also read her Juvenilia, which is writing from her youth. It's amazingly blunt and funny and full of fanciful imaginations of Jane's youth. So while it's not polished, it's really entertaining to see the beginnings of Jane's voice and themes take shape. Or you could join us for the second group read-along of her unfinished novels, The Watsons and Sanditon. We'll be reading Sanditon from July 17th through the 22nd, and The Watsons from the 23rd through the end of the month. The schedule will be linked down below for you. I don't believe The Watsons has any chapter breaks, so we'll just be reading that at your own pace from the 23rd through the end of the month, as the schedule states. So Jane started The Watsons in 1803 when she was living in Bath, and she abandoned it in 1805 after her father's death. I really enjoy The Watsons. I feel like it's a really brilliant start to a novel. It's unclear why Jane Austen never returned to it, but Edward Austen Lee's memoir does provide a very blunt and hurried description of the supposedly intended ending. And then Sanditon is what Jane was writing at the end of her life. It's about an up-and-coming seaside resort and its inhabitants. And interestingly enough, one of the characters is an heiress of color. It's fun to read Sanditon and speculate on where the plot and the nature of Jane's writing would have headed. But both of these unfinished works are very, very short, and they are really just the beginnings. The third challenge is to read a nonfiction work about Jane Austen or her time period, the late Georgian or Regency era. There are so many different ways to approach this challenge, and there are tons of books about the time period and about Jane Austen herself. You could read a biography of Jane Austen, of which there are no shortage of. My 2 personal favorite Jane Austen biographies are Lucy Worsley's Jane Austen at Home, which approaches Austen's life through the domestic spaces which she inhabited. And my other favorite biography is The Real Jane Austen, A Life in Small Things by Paula Byrne. Each chapter begins with a discussion of an object that was either owned by Jane Austen or represents a key moment of her life or an important theme in her work. You could also look to some literary criticism about Austen's work, my favorite of which is definitely John Mullen's What Matters in Jane Austen, 20 Crucial Puzzles Solved. Or you can read memoirs about how Austen's works have affected others. And then, of course, there are plenty of history books about the late Georgian or Regency era. And if you aren't interested in a dense history, you could always try something a little lighter. Here I have Tea with Jane Austen, recipes inspired by her novels and letters. And this is a book full of recipes from Jane Austen's time period. And there are also little introductions of how they are related to Jane Austen's works. Or you could try something fun like Jane Austen embroidery, Regency patterns reimagined for modern stitchers. This book is a lot of fun. It has authentic patterns from the Regency era, which you can actually follow and create a whole host of beautiful embroidered projects, and it includes snippets from Austen's letters and quotes from her novels, as well as pages of history specifically about Austen and embroidery. It's a really interesting book, and I actually did a whole video on it a year, 2 years, a while back, that you can check out if you're interested. The fourth challenge is to read a modern retelling of a Jane Austen book or a historical fiction book set during the Georgian or Regency era. There are so many Austen retellings and books, and some that I never even realized were loose Austen retellings out there. And there's really just something for every type of reader. There are YA retellings and multiple Jane Austen murder mystery series. I believe there's a Pride and Prejudice retelling with fantasy elements, including dragons. There are graphic novel versions of her main 6 novels. And if that wasn't enough, there are a ton of historical fiction books that take place in Austen's lifetime between 1775 and 1817. A book that I highly recommend for this challenge is The Murder of Mr. Wickham, which I was pleasantly surprised by last year. It's not a specific retelling per se, but it's about a house party turned murder mystery hosted by Emma with all of the main Austen characters that get together at the end of her books, with a few key exceptions. The detective figures are also the teenage children of some of the main Austen couples. I was blown away by the author's interpretations of Austen's characters, and it was fun to see how they all might interact with each other. I haven't read the second in the series yet, but it's called The Late Mrs. Willoughby, and there's also a third in the series called The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, which comes out June 18th. Some other favorites of mine for this challenge are Jill Hornby's 2 books. There's Miss Austen and Godmersham Park. Miss Austen is all about Jane Austen's legacy, her relationship with Cassandra, and how her sister Cassandra might have coped with Austen's death. And then Godmersham Park is based on the life of Anne Sharp, who was a governess to Jane Austen's niece, Fanny Knight, and friend to Jane Austen. There's also Longbourn by Jo Baker, which is a Pride and Prejudice retelling from the servant's point of view. And of course, there is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow, which is a Pride and Prejudice retelling from Mary's point of view, but only a third or so of the book is an actual retelling. After that, Mary steals the spotlight as the main character in her own Austen-esque story. This one evoked the feeling of reading one of Austen's main 6 novels for the first time. There are so many more I could talk about for this challenge, but I'll leave you with one more that I'm currently reading on an audiobook, and that is The Particular Charm of Miss Jane Austen. It's about a Jane Austen fan named Rose, whose new neighbor just so happens to be Jane Austen herself, whose time travel adventure has gone astray and led Rose to help Jane get back to her own time, to preserve a reality where Jane's novels still exist. It sounds really gimmicky, and I guess in some ways it is, but I'm really enjoying how it explores Jane's impact on an individual's life. I guess time travel and Jane Austen is actually a whole subgenre of this challenge, because there's also Confessions of a Jane Austen Addict by Laura Vera Rigler, which I didn't enjoy as much as The Particular Charm of Miss Jane Austen. And then there's also The Jane Austen Project by Kathleen Flynn, where 2 time travelers go back in time to meet Jane Austen. I really enjoyed that one actually too. Anyway, there are a million possibilities for this challenge, and every year I hear of more that excite me. None of them ever live up to Jane's actual novels for me, of course, but the best books of this challenge make me think of Austen's work in a new light, or make me desperately want to reread the originals, or both. The 5th challenge is to read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen, someone publishing in her lifetime, give or take a few years. Maria Edgeworth and Fanny Burney were Jane's favorite novelists, but some other famous authors of the time were Sir Walter Scott. There's the Romantic poets, Coleridge, Blake, Lord Byron, Wordsworth, Shelley, and Keats. Austen's favorite poet was Cooper. Then there's Susan Edmonston Ferrier, who is dubbed the Scottish Jane Austen. She's not a poet, she's a novelist. And if you're interested in plays, you could read the play that Jane Austen's characters performed in Mansfield Park called Lover's Vows. That's by Elizabeth Inchbald. Or you could read Richard Brinsley Sheridan's School for Scandal. That was a lot of fun. There are just so many authors for this one, and I do have some resources that I'll link down below. I have one that is entirely made of books that Jane Austen would have read herself. So you can find that in the description below to help with this challenge as well. And then there are 2 challenges of things to watch. The 6th challenge is to watch a direct screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. There are so many of these that I adore. There is Pride and Prejudice, the 1995 BBC miniseries with Colin Firth, as well as the 2005 version with Keira Knightley. For Sense and Sensibility, which I'm sure I will watch one of this year since the group read-along is Sense and Sensibility. There's the 1995 version with Kate Winslet as Marianne Dashwood. And then, of course, there's the 2008 BBC miniseries, which I absolutely adore. For Northanger Abbey, my favorite is the 2007 version, which I think is phenomenal. I absolutely love J.J. Field as Henry Tilney. For Persuasion, there's the 1995 BBC Persuasion and the 2008 version, which I don't like quite as much, but I like it a great deal as well. And then I specifically recommend that you do not watch the Netflix version of Persuasion. You are welcome. Let's see, for Emma, there's the 2009 BBC miniseries, which is one of my favorites, and the 2020 Emma movie, which I have some mixed feelings about, but is really beautiful. Absolutely stunning. I don't actually like any of the Mansfield Park adaptations because I don't love the way they portray Fanny Price, but there's one from 1999 and one from 2007 that I've watched and would recommend if you're looking for specifically a Mansfield Park adaptation. I continuously fall in love with the 2016 movie Love and Friendship with Kate Beckinsale. That isn't actually an adaptation of Love and Friendship, it's an adaptation of Lady Susan, but it is phenomenal and I feel like I watch it every single year. And then I have to mention Sanditon because we are reading Sanditon as the group read. There is the TV show Sanditon that was started in 2019, and I don't know how direct an adaptation that is, but I think it's best mentioned here rather than in the modern screen adaptation section. The first part of it is a direct adaptation, and then since it's an unfinished work, the producers just continue on and create their own ending, I believe. I've actually only watched the first season. I didn't feel like continuing at the time, but I'm considering rewatching the first season and seeing if I have any interest in the second season. And last but not least, challenge number 7 is to watch a modern screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. Again, there are so many of these. My 2 personal favorites of all time are Clueless and Fire Island. Clueless is an adaptation of Emma, and Fire Island is an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. I think these 2 are absolutely brilliant and make really smart choices to capture the spirit of Austen's original work. I also enjoy watching Bridget Jones's Diary and Pride and Prejudice, but they're just not quite on the level of Clueless and Fire Island. And there are so many more adaptations of Austen's works that aren't mentioned here. I'm sure you guys can come up with a whole list of them. Then there's also a lot of Austen-esque things that aren't quite modern adaptations of a particular book, but definitely work for this challenge. So that would be things like Lost in Austen, or Austenland, which is a personal favorite of mine, or the Jane Austen Book Club, which kind of adapts all the novels at once in its own way. And there's also web series for each Austen novel that are utterly brilliant. The Lizzie Bennet Diaries is the most famous of these, I think, but I love Emma Approved and From Mansfield with Love. And then one of my absolute favorites is Rational Creatures, which is a Persuasion retelling. I'll link all of these things and any that I've forgotten in the description below. So those are the challenges. I am so excited for Jane Austen July this year. I'm actually kicking off the month with a beach vacation, which I'm thrilled about because I am going back to the very same place where I read my first Jane Austen book many, many years ago. I suppose that's why I always associate Jane Austen with summer and the beach. We're only staying for 2 full days because traveling with a 1-year-old is tons of fun, but hopefully I'm able to get some good reading in and maybe even do a vlog or something. We'll see. I'm really hoping that I can make all the videos I want this year. I don't know how people on BookTube with kids manage to read and script and film and post regularly. Clearly, I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I'm excited to be back for Jane Austen July. I'd love to hear in the comment section down below if you'll be participating this year and what you are most excited for this Jane Austen July. Until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another bookish video very soon. Bye!